So you've rolled credits on Requiem, maybe even twice, and hopefully you did, as one ending sure means a lot more than the other. In fact, it basically rewrites and recontextualizes a lot of what we thought we knew about Resident Evil's lore. Okay, so let's get into it. To start, each ending is determined by answering one question. What does the creator desire? The answer is narrowed down to a basic binary this or that choice: destroy Elpis or release Elpis. And, well, to make sense of the answer, we have to go over the events that led to this moment. The story starts with Grace's mother, Alyssa Ashcroft, an investigative reporter and survivor of the Raccoon City incident. For reasons unclear at first, Alyssa has been bouncing from hotel to hotel, town to town with Grace. Unbeknownst to Grace, Alyssa was trying to protect her, but sadly the thing Alyssa tried so hard to protect Grace from caught up with them and led to Alyssa's death. And, unfortunately, a fire ravaged the crime scene, destroying all evidence of the incident, including Alyssa's assassin. But the fire didn't destroy everything. Alyssa was savvy enough to hide what would eventually be the answer to the ending's biggest question: what does the creator desire? Unfortunately, in the midst of chaos and trauma, Grace forgot about the file her mother hid, but, who can blame her? Many years later, a series of mysterious deaths start to occur, each having a consistent thread. They're all survivors of the Raccoon City incident and are dying from a late-onset side effect from the T virus, which is later called Raccoon City Syndrome, according to a file found in the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center. Grace, now an FBI analyst who is investigating these deaths, is called back to the hotel where her life changed forever to visit the crime scene of yet another mysterious death. However, this time, it is a trap. Cue Victor Gideon, a former researcher of the T-Virus and Ozwell Spencer's #1 fanboy, and he's stepping in to finish Spencer's research on Elpis. And Victor thinks Grace is the key to Elpis. Ozwell Spencer is the founder of Umbrella and a key facilitator in the creation of the T-Virus, and one of the next big supposed viruses he was developing to push his fascist mind-controlling agenda is Elpis. Considering Spencer's track record for being the leader in creating world-devastating viruses that can be turned into biochemical warfare, one shady crime syndicate was determined to steal Umbrella's research and turn them into bioweapons of its own to sell on a global scale. The Connections. Now, you may know the Connections from Resident Evil 7, in which they were first introduced and were responsible for finding the fungus that led to the mold. Despite the Connections being introduced so late in the series, they've now been a consistent through line in Village and now Requiem, with Requiem confirming they've been around since the 1980s. Its MO, develop bioweapons primarily made from stolen information from Umbrella. In Grace's report, which is unlocked after the release ending, it is reported that the Connections were colluding with Umbrella founders and employees such as James Marcus, Brandon Bailey, and Albert Wesker, all of whom were in opposition to Ozwell Spencer. In order for Spencer to research Elpis, he constructed the Ark, a top-secret lab built under Raccoon City. When information of Elpis' development leaked to the Connection in the 1990s, it was stated that its existence had potential to upset the military balance of the entire world, and they would do anything at all costs to steal it. Ozwell Spencer, however, had the foresight to lock Elpis behind a password. If the wrong password is entered, Elpis would be destroyed entirely. And it is Alyssa's final interview with Ozwell Spencer that holds the password, and that Grace somehow was the key to it. Victor Gideon took Grace being the key to Elpis very literally.
I know now that you're the one that I've been searching for. The special one.
So instead of trying to find the password for Elpis, Victor then dedicated his life work to instead trying to backwards engineer Elpis from Grace, I think.
Kidnap me.
Kidnap you? I liberated you.
Who are you?
Oh, forgive me. Dr. Victor Gideon. I run this center. It took forever to find you. You're not like other people, you know. You're quite unique. Through you, Elpis can finally be set free.
Victor Gideon planted the Raccoon City syndromed corpse at the Wrenwood Hotel, knowing that Grace was on the case and would return to it. What Victor did not predict, however, is that it would jog Grace's memories of Alyssa's hidden file. Grace finds the disc containing the final interview and puts it in her pocket, and apparently she forgets about having it until the very end of the game. Anyway, Grace is kidnapped by Victor, and he drains her of her blood, thinking it's the final piece in rebuilding Elpis.
All tests have come back positive. I can confirm that she is indeed the one that we've been searching for. If all goes as planned, Elpis will soon be in our hands.
So how does Leon S. Kennedy fit into all of this? Well, he too is investigating the mysterious deaths that are taking the lives of Raccoon City survivors, bringing him at a crossroads with Grace and Victor. While pursuing a cat-and-mouse game with Victor Gideon and also trying to save Grace in the process, Leon discovers that he and Sherry Birkin, survivors of the Raccoon City bombing nearly 30 years ago, are indeed infected with the Raccoon City syndrome, or as Victor Gideon calls it,
Umbrella's curse.
A file concerning the T-virus also mentions Elpis, but its context is redacted. Along with it, a photo of Grace, thrusting Leon further into this wild goose chase trying to get to her. Then there's Zeno, the not Wesker guy. He presumably works for the Connections, meaning the Connections and Victor have seemingly teamed up to get Elpis.
Raccoon City. You're the reason for its destruction, but you're also the key to building a brave new world. You're the final piece. Let us show you your true purpose.
People just keep telling her that she's important, but no one really ever actually says exactly why. They're all just being vague as hell about it.
I'm gonna find Grace. She definitely has something to do with Elpis.
We know. Meanwhile, the BSAA, a bioterrorism organization whose allegiance goes awry following the events of Village, is there too, trying to get into ARC, the same umbrella facility Victor and Zeno have been occupying for years. In fact, Requiem confirms that all the bioweapons used in the series post the Raccoon City incident have all been developed in ARC. So for the entirety of its quarantine, ARC has been a thing below Raccoon City where folks are making biochemical weapon stuff. Everyone is trying to get their mitts on Elpis. Zeno says that covert military units from every country come to Raccoon City for Elpis, despite no one actually knowing entirely what it is. They're all just assuming what it is. According to Zeno, Elpis is designed to take full control of human consciousness. And due to its godlike power, the missile strike on Raccoon City wasn't launched to contain the T-virus outbreak in 1998. It was launched to hide Elpis underground in ARC. The bombing resulted in a quarantine bound to keep anyone out that was set to lift in 2026, but was then deemed suddenly still not safe, and that quarantine was extended to 2040. The quarantine's extension was because no one had been able to gain access to Elpis yet, so the quarantine as a whole was just a big ol' ploy. In fact, the game slightly reframes why the president was assassinated in Resident Evil 6. Yes, the president was assassinated for attempting to reveal why Raccoon City was really bombed, but Requiem adds another layer, which deliberately ties it into Elpis. By the way, you might remember that the person who assassinated the president is Derek Simmons, who was a part of another crime syndicate known as The Family, which I guess now is apparently a subgroup of the Connections. All parties involved were at a loss on how to get Elpis, or had no means to figuring out its password, and the risk of entering the wrong password was far too great. So they cloned Grace for some reason, meaning Emily and the girl were clones of Grace, supposedly. We'll get into that in a moment. They seem to think Grace's copies would know the key/password to Elpis somehow. Yeah. Okay, so this leads Grace to also believe that she too is an experiment of Ozwell Spencer's. However, this is not the case at all. As it so happens, no one really seems certain of anything. Even Zeno admits of a mind control virus existing, referring to the mold from Resident Evil 7, but notes it isn't efficient at affecting others, and that he believes, doesn't know for certain mind you, that Ozwell Spencer meant to solve that with Elpis. So everyone is just kind of shooting in the dark on this one. The reason why no one knew is because Alyssa Ashcroft, Grace's mother, was sitting on the answer all along. Alyssa was granted a private interview with Ozwell Spencer at the tail end of his life while he was knocking on death's door. It was an opportunity to share the truth. It's here Grace unveils the truth of her involvement in all of this. Spencer, who has had a god complex for his entire life and sought to create a master human race of his own, had a turn of heart later in life, learning to appreciate one key thing in mankind: hope. Hope, as he states, is due to humans not knowing when death will come for them. So it just takes Spencer not knowing when death is coming for him, despite being clearly almost dead, that he suddenly gets the hope thing. It also kind of doesn't align with this speech he has in Resident Evil 5, but whatever.
For one who has the right to be a god.
It's also in this interview video that a key detail is exposed. Grace is not one of Spencer's test subjects.
I took her in to make amends. Is she perfectly normal?
Grace was simply an orphan, and Spencer took her in as a means to make amends with his guilt. Grace is not special. Her blood is the answer to nothing. Her clones were wasted in cruel experiments with no real purpose. She is an ordinary girl that just needed a home. Okay, so let's pause here real quick. This reveal clears up a few things and potentially makes a mess of some other things, so let's just fire through it. So yeah, Grace is not an experiment or a clone. She's just a normal girl. Check. Got it. But if that's the case, Zeno's assumption of Emily being a clone of Grace is wrong. Zeno reveals that cloning has been happening as early as 1990 and has continued up until present day with Emily and the girl. This contradicts the possibility they are clones of Grace, as Grace was a baby during Spencer's final interviews before his death in 2006. If Grace is a normal girl after all and is not a clone, then there is no way Emily could be a clone of Grace. Or vice versa. We also don't know when for sure the interview with Spencer and Alyssa happened, so this does create some timeline gap. We can make some assumptions considering that he died near 2006, and that since we don't know Grace's actual birthday, we can make the leap that Grace was born in 2006 or 2005, which would make her about 20, 21 years old now. Now, Victor corroborates this when he appears long after his Looney Tunes death scene and says,
There was no connection between Grace and Emily.
And with that in mind, so what was the deal with the clones? Frankly, I don't know. If I had to take another leap, the cloned orphan girls were just vehicles for experimentation. And that's it, I think. So with Victor and Zeno not having all the information to begin with, maybe assume Grace must have been a part of the orphanage cloning program purely by proxy of knowing Grace was somehow tied to Spencer. For the record, Jean-Luc Seipke, the other Resident Evil person on staff, and I have spent several actual workdays trying to make sense of this. Anyways, moving on. This brings us to the big password, the big question to answer on the computer terminal that hosts Elpis. What does the creator desire? Well, if you've been paying attention, it's certainly not destruction. If you enter destruction, Leon dies trying to buy Grace some time to escape while Ark self-destructs. So yeah, then Grace just sort of leaves, Leon is dead, credits roll. There's really no conclusion here. If anything, it's more like a gotcha for those who weren't paying attention or skipped all the cutscenes. But ultimately, this ending doesn't serve any real purpose or has any bearing on what is the actual canon ending of this game. This is kind of basically like a game over state, which is made all the more obvious when the game prompts you to see its other ending. All right, so now about the actual ending. If you've been paying attention, what the creator desires is hope. After Grace releases Elpis, it is all revealed that Elpis was, in fact, an antivirus all along to cure all the ills Umbrella themselves had created.
Elpis is Spencer's atonement. It's an antiviral.
Making Zeno and Victor and everyone else trying to get their hands on Elpis all these years just look like a bunch of ding-dongs. But before that's all clear, Zeno injects himself with it, ridding himself of his superpowers. What a cornball. Victor awes in the genius of Spencer, but even still doesn't entirely grasp Elpis's intention, believing it will wreak chaos as the balance of the world's defense against one another would be rendered obsolete. And while Victor sees Spencer as some amazing genius, he doesn't seem to fully grasp what Spencer's intentions were. So he triggers a self-destruct, snags a sample of Elpis, and then dukes it out with Leon, who is now cured of all of his Raccoon City syndrome problems. Now, the only thing that left me stumped was the second phase of Victor's boss fight, when he returns and Leon just straight up calls him Nemesis.
Nemesis. No wonder you're so damn relentless.
Referring to Resident Evil 3's Stalker. Frankly, it's a little out of nowhere, and I can only assume that Victor has turned into a nemesis humanoid tyrant-like, probably in his dedication to fulfill a god-like form like Spencer's research implied. The boss fight is also just a spinning image of the final nemesis fight in Resident Evil 3 Remake, so there's that. After all is said and done, Chris Redfield's elite Hound Wolf squad come and bail Leon and Grace out. Hoo-yah! Now, if you had happened to do this ending first, the game does not prompt you to even see the bad ending. So even further kind of proving that, yeah, that other ending is just, I don't know, some sort of game over state or maybe a way of Capcom messing with folks who thought Leon was going to die. Oh, and yeah, by the way, I guess Emily is cured of her blindness, it seems, as you can see a picture of her on Grace's desk, no longer with the milky white eyes. After completing this ending, Grace's final report is unlocked. 60 slides that detail and establish what is now the current timeline for Resident Evil. And this is where the series' retcons are on full display. So I've gone over a lot of these already just by explaining what happened and the events that led to the ending, but just to kind of wrap them up, this is as follows. Just about everything concerning Spencer doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, specifically when watching his speech from Resident Evil 5.
I was to become a god.
Yes, he was a bad guy, mad scientist-like dude who made horrible viruses, but his death, his dying sort of conversation with Alyssa now doesn't really align with his dying speech to Albert Wesker. It shows two different sides, and this is the Spencer we now have to say is canon. The guy who, on his deathbed, regretted what he did and wanted atonement for all the horrible things that he had caused. Then there's the reason for the president's assassination, and in Resident Evil 6, it established that Simmons was a part of the family, which has now been folded into the connections. But if Derek C. Simmons initiated the bombing of Raccoon City, but that doesn't really align with the connections, forcing the bombing to happen so they could eventually get into Ark and get Elpis. So yeah, the missile strike in Raccoon City wasn't meant to contain the spread of the outbreak. Rather, it was meant to disrupt the relationship between the US government and Umbrella, which would then shift the blame for the corporation's illegal activities onto Ozwell Spencer. Grace's report also rewrites a little bit from Resident Evil Village concerning Brandon Bailey, the protege of Umbrella co-founder James Marcus, who was said to be the founder of the Connections, but he is actually, in fact, not a founder, but a cog in the wheel, which now means that the true founder of the Connections remains a mystery. Lastly, Grace's report details that Wesker and Tricell were funded by the Connections. So this basically establishes that the villains of Resident Evil 5 and 6 were folded into being funded by the Connections. More or less, it just feels like they're just trying to form all the rival corporations into one big bad evil entity, essentially replacing Umbrella. Now, yeah, it's messy and convoluted, but if I were to kind of give a reason for this ending, and actually even a defense for this ending, is that it allows for Resident Evil to kind of start at a clean slate, to move on from 30 years of convoluted lore just kind of folding on top of one another. It is a Requiem. That's the entire through line of the game. It takes the lore and puts a giant revolver magnum to its bulbous mutated head and pulls the trigger. Considering how convoluted the lore has become in Resident Evil, feels like the right step. Whether they did it gracefully, I don't know, it's still Resident Evil, so it's gotta be over the top and soap opera-like in some way or another. There's also still some unanswered questions, like Blue Umbrella from Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8. Is that even still a thing, or are we just forgetting that ever happened? Then there's the squad that appears right at the end of the game before it goes black. They show up and they say that they're there to retrieve the objective before the wolves show up, which, from the looks of it, that means that this scene probably happened before the final fight of the game, considering that's just as the Hound Wolf squad appears. We also still have no idea who Zeno is, the not Wesker guy. After all, Wesker absolutely definitely died in Resident Evil 5, for sure. We can theorize about this all day. I mean, there's on one hand, he could just be a homage or maybe even call back to the past and a reason to kill the past. Maybe they made him look like Wesker, so when he was killed, it was them sort of kind of using him as a symbolism to say that they are destroying where they came from. I mean, after all, Victor flat out calls him a cheap imitation. The other sort of, I don't know, easier suggestion is that he's just a clone of Wesker or something. Doesn't still quite explain why he has Raccoon City syndrome, but I'm not going to think too hard about it. Anyways, that is the ending of Resident Evil 9 Explained. I did my best, and if I missed some stuff, you can let me know. What do you think happened? Are you cool with this? Were you taken by surprise by the not true ending of Leon getting killed? I sure was. So yeah. All right. For all the other Resident Evil stuff, stay here at GameSpot.